Roadside standoff with the presidential motorcade. International mediators have called on government and opposition to enter a national dialogue for the sake of Zambian unity and stability. But is there a willingness on either side to put the nation first? Well, Hakainde Hichilema joins me now. Welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for hosting me, Stephen.
It's a pleasure to host you, not least because you are now a free man. This summer you spent more than 3 months in prison, but you were released. You are out. Is it now time, would you acknowledge, to build fences with your political enemies, in particular the President Lungu of Zambia?
First, I'm glad to be out. Nobody really should be in prison, especially when you're not in prison for committing a crime. So it's nice to be out of prison, and I'm grateful to all of those who did something.
Time for an olive branch?
I think it's time to fix the broken pieces, democratic pieces in our country. That's how I would define it. Very, very essential.
Let's talk about the incident that got you into prison. Many people around the world will find it quite bizarre. You were in the west of your country on the road with your team,
Sure.
a sort of convoy,
Yes.
when the presidential convoy, motorcade, came through on the same road, and you and your team refused to pull over and get out of the way, which of course is expected when a president passes through. Why?
Factually, that's not what it was, Stephen. His motorcade was coming behind us. We were ahead of him. He overtook not just my 4 or 5 vehicles, but 100 other vehicles in a similar manner.
It's a bit of a sort of he said, she said story, in that there are 2 versions of this, yours and the president's. But let us stick with what the police chief of your country said. He said, Mr. Kanganja, he said, it has been established that the opposition leader disobeyed police orders and thereby put the life of the head of state in danger.
Absolutely not true, 1. 2, if that was the case, how is it that other 100 plus motor, if you like, road users were not arrested for treason? Why me?
Why do
Because exactly the same conditions obtained when his motorcade overtook several hundreds of other vehicles. Why did it become treason on me?
A couple of days later, there is a raid on your home. And you are grabbed. Your family, it seems, were deeply upset by what they saw. You were hauled off to prison. And I think for a few days you were held in solitary confinement.
Sure, 8 days.
Yes. Now, this is not pleasant. Nobody could say this was a pleasant experience. But the bottom line is you were treated with respect. You were ultimately freed after, just over 3 months in captivity. And
4
that
months.
charge of treason, which initially was put against you, was dropped. So I'm just wondering why you have made such a fuss about what happened to you.
First, Stephen, I should have never been arrested. I and 5 others should have never been arrested. First, because we did not commit any treason.
Well, we've sort of gone into that. So let's now discuss what this overall incident tells us about Zambia today. Because, as I say, in some countries I can think of, you might still be languishing in prison. But the bottom line is, after a degree of intervention from the outside, including from the Secretary General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland, and a degree of compromise, let's put it that way, you emerged from prison and now you're a free man and you've just travelled to London conducting your political work. So what is the message of all of this, do you think?
I think the message is that we need to clean up our democratic credentials. The situation in Zambia should never allow a citizen to be brutally arrested and detained 8 days in solitary confinement, 120 days in total in prison, under degrading and inhuman conditions, not well treated, as we may put it. And for
to be specific, what are you accusing the prison authorities of doing to you?
First, the manner in which I was arrested was unacceptable, because in the first place, I have been arrested by the PF government since 2011 by over 10 times. All I received, Stephen, was a police call out, and I presented myself to the police.
And this serious allegation of yours of brutal treatment in prison, what's your evidence for that?
Well, the footage is there. First, the house was swamped by over 300 heavily armed policemen. Broke the entrance to the yard, broke the house down, accessed. So that's evidence.
Yes, all right.
And then in 8 days in solitary confinement, I couldn't see anybody. I was in a room without electricity, without water, without a toilet. And literally, basically, how can you put somebody in the dark room for 8 days? For what? It's there. And it had to take a court ruling the 8th day to take me out of that location and basically move me to an ordinary prison. And there's a court ruling to that. There's evidence. And the court ruling talks to this issue.
Given your treatment, would you say that you emerged from your detention fearful, intimidated in a sense, in a way that you weren't before?
Maybe the intention was to break me down. We're not broken because we understood, we expected that a government like the one we have in Zambia could do things like this. The signs or the writing was on the wall. But really, we emerged stronger. And I've said before, I repeat it 10 times stronger.
Well, interestingly, you say you emerged stronger, but you also emerged making noises about conciliation. I mean, as I said, you saw the Secretary-General of the Commonwealth, Baroness Scotland, who was instrumental in your release. And after your release, you said, and I'm quoting you directly, "It is our collective duty to bring unity to our country. We cannot run a country like this. We are currently so divided." You saw the wisdom there of collective action, presumably dialogue, to unify the country. Do you still feel that way today?
Absolutely. And my message was in reference to specific things, Stephen, that need to be fixed, that need to be corrected, so that we don't continue with a negative situation. But we can talk about it.
Well, yes, we will. But if you want to, I just want to go through this quite forensically. If you want to unify the country, is it not time for you to drop your insistence that the president is illegitimate and the election was a fraud?
You could see it that way. The other way of seeing it is that the constitutional right of disputing elections, which is via an electoral presidential petition, must be respected, because that's a constitutional provision. So the rule of law with regard to the remedies that are available to anybody.
Well, as I understand it, the Constitutional Court looked at your arguments and threw them out.
Not at all. That's the irony of it. Our petition has not been heard, Stephen. Well, that's a fact.
It has been before a court. I know that for a fact.
Yes.
Yes. So you've had your day in court. The court, in the end, chose not to take up your petition.
No. The basic constitutional provision under the Bill of Rights, Stephen, is that every citizen or a group of citizens that feel aggrieved about anything have a right to go to court, and the court has an obligation to hear their matter, not to just admit the concern or the petition, but to hear it. Well, our petition has not been heard.
The court took the decision to throw out your petition, but the bottom line surely is that under most circumstances, the international norm is that governments around the world take a view as to whether an election is deemed to be fair and reasonable, legitimate or not. And the clear collective view in the case of Zambia, the election of 2016, it was regarded as acceptable. The United States of America, the Undersecretary of State for African Affairs, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, she congratulated Mr. Lungu on his re-election, saying it was a clear manifestation of the will of the Zambian people. The UK High Commissioner, he sent a message, actually this year on the Queen's birthday, calling on respect for the head of state, a clear signal the UK respects the position of Mr. Lungu. President Zuma of South Africa cordially invited President Lungu to South Africa in a sign of his belief in the credibility of that election.
You could say so, and maybe you could be heard and heard loudly if what you have said was not challenged by the Kenyan Constitutional Court ruling over the last election in Kenya, not the current issues going on, but just before that nullified the Kenyan election, which included basically discrediting such comments from international observers. What matters is to follow the rule of law to ensure that the petition is heard, not just submitted. That, I think that's what is important. And the Kenyan ruling has demystified those views. Remember, former Secretary of State John Kerry rendered an apology in the Kenyan situation because similar sentiments were passed. The important things that the Constitutional Court should have heard our petition And then the issue of recognition, the issue of whether or not the election was free and fair would have been resolved squarely, and nobody would complain about it.
You accuse Mr. Lungu and his ruling party of a series of fraudulent actions concerning that election. But the truth is, your own party has a record that is highly questionable of, for example, inflammatory rhetoric. May I just quote you from Jeffrey Mwamba? This is before the election of last year, when he told a crowd of people that he would go for the throat of the president. What kind of language is that?
Well, Stephen, if you followed the campaign trail and looked at language flying from one side to another and vice versa, maybe you need complete audit of that. But
you, for example, you said that Lungu wanted to kill you.
Of course, it's evident. The manner in which I was arrested and detained and brutalized.
Obviously, with respect, I mean, if he'd wanted to kill you, he could have killed you. He didn't kill you. And there's absolutely no evidence that his intent was to kill you. My point is this. You came out of prison saying you wanted to work for national unity. National unity means getting away from this inflammatory rhetoric.
National unity means restoring the rule of law in all respects, whether the law in question, favors a particular group, doesn't matter, but it's the law. In a case like our petition, Article 104 of our petition indicates that once a petition is submitted, Stephen, just submission is obligatory for the executive powers to transfer to the Speaker of the National Assembly.
But you, as the leader of the United Party for National Development, have a duty to follow the law just as the President does.
Absolutely.
So explain to me how the discovery of 21 of your young party workers training in a gym with weapons, including machetes and live ammunition, how does that represent you following the law?
Well, Stephen, you would like to know that matter is in court, and the ruling, I think, will be up soon. And I can assure you, you may swallow back those words after the ruling in court. Accusations and trumped-up charges is the order of life in Zambia, and that's what we want to come out of. That negativity is not what we need for a country.
Did you tell your supporters to burn down the city market in Lusaka?
Absolutely not. That's why today there is nobody convicted from our side of burning a market.
The President says it was a clear act of sabotage designed to harm his government and him.
It was framing a strong opposition like us to justify the invocation of Article 31 of our Constitution, which is a threatened emergency. You cannot, Stephen, have a fire 5:30 in the morning. By 6 in the morning, same day, 30 minutes later, you go to the scene and say, it's UPND members who have burnt the market. Where is the investigation? It was never done. And that's why nobody will be convicted for it. On our side, it was a stage managed situation.
Do you feel yourself to be a true Democrat?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think Zambian democracy is in grave danger today?
It is in grave danger.
And
absolutely.
Would you say that you are partly responsible for that?
I think many players are partially responsible. That's why we would like to be part of, if you like, the resolution of these negativities. And we're very much committed to that. As I keep saying, human rights must be respected, restored. We've lost that at the moment. The rule of law must be respected. We've lost that at the moment. We need to stem political violence, which is becoming an order of the day in our country. That's responsible leadership.
Well, okay, but I feel in a sense we're skirting around the same issue again and again. If you are serious about what you say, of wanting to save Zambian democracy, if you want to sit down with your opponents and find a way through this crisis, then surely the first thing you have to do is accept the legitimacy of the president. Because before you do that, how can he possibly sit down with you?
Any discussion, any dialogue must be anchored on preconditions.
Well, surely that's the most basic precondition of all.
That would be basically an indication of unwillingness to dialogue. First, that's what I say. Secondly, I have already answered the question.
You've just said it, but that doesn't mean it makes much sense. I mean,
why not?
Here is a president who is accepted by the international community as the legitimate leader of your country. If you, as the leader of the opposition, want to sit down and have a dialogue with him to work through some of the political problems that are so manifest in your country today, surely you have to accept his legitimacy?
Stephen, I have already said it before. There is no legal obligation in our statutes anywhere for what you are asking me to do. Secondly, we have a petition still in the courts of law, alive, active in the courts of law. So how would anyone make a comment like that? What would that mean to the rule of law?
So remind me, is it a 4-year or a 5-year term the president's elected? 5 years. So you're telling me that for the next foreseeable future, possibly for a full 5-year term, you are simply going to refuse to accept that your country has a legitimate president?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I am saying that if our presidential petition, which is before the courts of law, and you can verify that yourself or anyone who wishes to do so, is dealt with, therein lies the issue of recognition. This is a no-brainer at all.
Why do you think you've lost 5 elections?
You can say that, but this is
why... Answer the question. Why do you think you have... Zambia is held up by Africans as an example of a state that has embraced democracy, relative freedom. It's not perfect. We know you've got problems with your media and with other elements of repression, but ultimately it's been fairly free and fairly democratic for a generation. And you have had the chance to run for the top office in your country, and you've repeatedly lost. Why?
First, Stephen, that's what we are challenging through the courts of law.
So you think every time you ran for office, you were unfairly beaten? Every vote was rigged, was it?
But how many times have I gone to court to petition? This is the first time. Why? It's because of the manner in which the election was managed. The electoral process, basically, which lacks transparency, the electoral process which lacks, if you like, integrity. And that's why we are asking for replacement of the Electoral Commission as it is in the current position or replaced with a truly independent Electoral Commission, as is the case in the region, South Africa, for example. So, but the issue here, Stephen, is really to turn your question around. Why didn't we petition before? Why did we petition this time around? It's because there are issues on the ground. And we tested our argument by petitioning parliamentary seats in an area that we thought was flawed, Lusaka. 2 of them, we've had the elections nullified. Same election in 2016 of 2 parliamentary seats in Lusaka.
Let me put this to you, that it seems to me you're somewhat more preoccupied with self-interest than the national interest. Because if you were serious about working with the government to try and solve some of Zambia's problems, you might be more focused on some of the stunning and really alarming statistics in your country. Life expectancy for men, 49 years, for women, 50. Endemic poverty. I mean, poverty rates that are truly stunning and are going to get worse because the population of 13 or 14 million could be 50 million by 2050. And as we've heard most recently from former Nigerian President Obasanjo, population explosion in Africa is perhaps the biggest problem Africa faces of all of them. And yet you are just obsessed with your own fight with Mr. Lungo over the last election. Can't you focus on what really matters?
I really think that it's not a question of this or that. It's a question of all of the things you're saying are important. Because in order to basically support the country's population, take it out of poverty, provide education, health, and clean water, all of those issues are connected to the quality of leadership, which quality of leadership in a democracy comes through elections. And that's where the competition for office in order to serve and to do the things that you're saying, which I totally agree with, lies. So it's not either this or that.
A recent Economist Intelligence Unit article actually looked at your economic policies and the government's and concluded that both of them aren't addressing Zambia's real issues. That is the over-reliance on mining and the copper industry in particular, the massive amounts of money that is spent every year on subsidies for fuel and basic staples. You know, your economy is broken. You've got, what is it? Just let me check here. You've got the 3rd hungriest country in the world, according to the Global Hunger Index. These are problems that neither your party nor, frankly, Mr. Lungu's seem to be capable of addressing.
I think, Stephen, now you're getting to the real issues that are affecting the people daily. This is one of the issues at top of our agenda. Governance. Governance that will ensure that we end or we reduce to the minimum endemic corruption that we see today in the country, which basically sits in many areas, procurement of loans. Today you have a country called Zambia, which is procuring expensive loans at 9.5% Eurobonds, as opposed to procuring loans from bilateral and multilateral organizations, such as the current proposal at the IMF, which is a 0% interest. That's a question. Why would a leadership which is basically riddled with poverty amongst its population go and procure loans which are more expensive than cheaper loans? It's because of corruption. That's what we need to fight.
You think you can fix Zambia's problems?
Zero tolerance on corruption.
Will you run again in the next scheduled presidential election in 2021?
I think the question is that, are we going to have free and fair, credible elections in 2021? We can't do that if we reform. Is it your intention
to run?
We can do that if we reform the electoral process.
And
anyone is free to run, including myself.
Okay, and finally, a lot of this interview has been about your relationship with President Lungu. According to one technical interpretation of the Constitution, he cannot run again in 2021 because he's already run twice. He says, actually, he can run again because his first election was as a result of the death of the sitting president, and he was only in power for a year before another election came along. So he says he's the right to run in 2021. Do you agree with him?
It's not a question of, Stephen, whether I agree or not. It's another example of the importance of respecting the rule of law. The Constitution provides clearly what constitutes 2 terms. It's very clear. And
so can he run again or not?
If we follow the constitutional provisions, and that's the way it should be.
Well, what's the answer? In your view, can he run again or not?
Hang on, it's not my view, Stephen. It's a legal provision, and the matter is in the Constitutional Court at the moment, as we speak. And I think that decision will be made. If the judges follow the constitutional provisions, which is what we want them to do, they will make a determination whether he can run or not. And that determination must be respected.
Hakainde Hichilema, we have to end there, but thank you for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Nice talking to you.
It's much appreciated. That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Saka. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.